Welcome! Today I'm going to continue my work with plates. If you follow my channel, you've probably seen the videos that I did in the past and how I came to these plates. I really like the design, the clay, the patterns and textures and glazes, but there's one little thing left. They're a little bit on the heavy side, I think. So today I'm going to continue this work and I'm going to try and make them a little bit lighter, but keep the good things about the design and the way that I do them. So in this video, I'll show you again how I make these plates really easy, very fast, very reliable method, but how I can make them lighter too. For a long time, I didn't do plates because I thought it was very difficult. They would warp and crack and take too much space in my kiln, and I had lots of excuses for not making plates. But then finally I came around, I experimented, I saw videos and got inspiration from other potters, and I found a really easy, reliable way of making the plates. I'll show you again today how I do that. This is the one that I came up with a couple of variations of glazes, and I really like that. Designing a plate is an interesting challenge, I think, because they're both aesthetic and functional issues. I wanted to design a plate that looks good, because, what's the point if you just make a plate that looks like something you can get a lot cheaper in IKEA? I wanted something that looks good, and I like this. But I also wanted something that fulfill certain requirements I have for the function of it. First of all, it needs to be nice to eat off. It needs to fit my dishwasher. And I want them to stack well so they don't take up too much space in my cabinets. And I wanted to make sure that the way that I glaze them wouldn't leave cutlery marks. Some plates, when you use your cutlery, they over time leave marks. It just doesn't look so good. So there's a lot of practical requirements for a plate. And I'm kind of like that. Mostly I just do, decorative pieces and vases and big bowls and stuff, and you don't have the same sort of functional requirements, but you do for plates, and I really like that. It's a nice challenge. So as I mentioned in the beginning, one of the small challenges I have left is that I think it's a little bit too heavy. It is a big plate. It actually doesn't look so big because the flange is not so big. But if you compare it to a standard plate, this one is from IKEA, boring white plate. But if you look at the inside, the size on the inside where you actually keep your food, it's only about 19 centimeter, and mine is 21. So even though the white one looks much bigger, the area where you put your food is actually bigger on my one. And also, this is also sort of heavy. It is ceramics. It doesn't feel that much different. If we weigh them, we can see that it's actually very close. If we look at the dinner plate from IKEA first and weigh that, we can see that it's almost 800 grams, 794 to be precise. So let's compare that to the plate that I made and see how much that weighed. It's 874 grams, so less than 100 grams more. So even though it's actually 2 centimeters wider, it's only less than 100 grams more heavy. But still, I would like it to be even lighter. As you may recall from my previous plate videos, I experimented with different amounts of clay. First, I looked up some traditional pottery websites, and some of them suggested up to 2,500 grams of clay, and I was like, yeah, that's going to be way too heavy. So I tried first, I think 1,600 grams, that was too much, then 15, then 14, and I ended up with 1,300 grams of clay. So this is what I got out of it. So why that big difference from 1,300 to less than 900 grams for this final plate? Well, most of it has to do with the water evaporating when it dries and when it's fired. I actually do very little trimming. I only trim the corner a little bit to round it off. So most of it has to do with evaporating. But to make these plates lighter, I decided to drop it quite a bit. So for these ones, I'm going to try with only 1,000 grams of clay. That should give me a plate that may be only 600, 700 grams in total when it's done. To make my plate, I only use a few tools. Let me just remove this first. First of all, I throw my plates on beds. And I always like to throw on beds. It's just much easier to move the pots after making them. But especially for plates, because it's such a wide and thin piece of pottery that is almost impossible, I think, to remove it when it's still leather hard without breaking or warping it. So using plates or beds for plates, I think it's much easier. The next thing is how I initially do the dish form of it. And as you may recall from my previous videos, I found that pushing it down with this sort of roller, the tube, actually helped me with two things. First of all, it's very easy and very fast to make it. And secondly, by pushing it down this way, you compress it a lot. And I do think that this contributes to the fact that my plates are not warping and they're not cracking. They're very heavily compressed, and I think that helps. Now, I've been using this PVC tube I found in a builder's market, very cheap. I just cut it to a size so it fits within my, my splash pan. But I did have one problem with this. When you push too hard, it tends to bend just a little bit, not much, but just a little bit. So recently I just found this other one, which is for kitchen, you know, rolling out your dough. It's Christmas time now, so I think they featured these and they were quite cheap. So this is metal, it's not gonna bend. Now I'm just curious to see how it glides over the clay, but I have a really good feeling about this one. So I'm gonna try and use that today. The other two tools I use are very specialized. The first one is my rib. And this is a rib that I made myself out of hardwood. I really just cut it like this and then I sanded it on the sides so it had have a sharp edge. And I used that to raise the flange. The reason it's so short is that first I had a longer one, but it couldn't fit here because of the splash pan and because it's so wide. I had to make these very little one. They're very easy to make. I haven't found anywhere you can actually buy this particular one. And the size of it fits perfectly for my plates. And then I have this little tool that I love so much. To begin with, when I was making these plates, I threw the dish and then I had to measure how wide it had to be and then cut it at the right size. And then I saw someone on another YouTube video suggesting making a tool like this. It's not very beautiful, but basically it's a piece of wood. I cut out a piece so it fits my splash pan. I put in a nail and I grinded it so it's sharp. And now I can just put it over here and cut it so I don't need to measure. And all of the plates are going to be exactly the same size. The last tool I use is not necessary to make the plates, but I use them for my design. It's this texture roller. This one is from MKM Tools and I just love these ones. They come with a lot of different texture rollers and then you have this handle, you just put it on. And this one in particular is the one that I've chosen to use for my plates. I'll show you how I use it. So let's get started by wedging up 1,000 gram pieces of clay. I'm going to use the same clay that I used in the past plates, this black clay from Georg Schneider in Germany. So this is 1,000 grams of clay. Now I just need to wedge it up. And as you've probably seen in some of my videos, I don't always wedge my clay, but it depends a little bit on the clay type. And this clay needs a little bit of wedging. Not a whole lot, but I just want to make sure that there's no air holes or inconsistency in the clay. It just makes the whole throwing a lot easier. It looks like so little, but let's see how it works out. I'm only gonna make these 2 clay balls for now because it is an experiment. Remember last time I did it with 1,300 grams? This is a lot less. So I'm not sure if it's gonna work. I hope so, but I'm not gonna make a whole lot of clay balls now. Just gonna make these 2 and see how it turns out. And of course, I mean, first part of the challenge is to see if I can throw them to the size that I want. I'm not too nervous about that. Next part is, will the flange be too thin when I push it up? We'll see. And then of course, finally, after they dry and they fire, will they feel too fragile, or is the lighter plate really, desirable? So we'll see. I'm just gonna make a small handful of these ones and finish them, glaze them, and we'll see how it works out. And of course, the final judge will be my family. Do they prefer eating from these ones instead of the first ones I made? So now we're ready to make a few plates. Making the plate is actually quite fast. This is part of what I love about making them this way. As always, just center the clay ball. Push it up and down just a few times to align particles and make sure there's no bubbles left in it, air bubbles left in it. But this seems fine. And then the only thing I do at this stage is I create this sort of a puck. So I flatten it initially, just a little bit, like this. And try and keep it, relatively centered, but it's not actually very important. I mean, because we're gonna cut it off in the right size. So this should be good. I do like to keep my bed sort of clean. And now we're ready to push it down and into the full size of the plate. And now I'm going to try this one with the PVC tube. I had to make sure that it's quite wet and also add a little bit of water on top of my puck. So let's see how this works. Yeah, it does scrape off a little bit of clay. So maybe I need to keep it a little more wet. But yeah, so far it does tend to scrape off just a little bit of clay. It's very little, but I think I need to keep it very wet. And now I made the floor wet too. This wasn't intentionally. So I'm just gonna go a little bit slower on this than because it's still new to me. Yeah, that was better. Still scraped off very little clay, but I think this is good. Just the final touch. It definitely feels a little bit better. It's not bending or anything, so I think this is good. So now I'm just gonna see if it's wide enough, and sure, it is. So now I'm going to cut off something, which is also one of the reasons, by the way, that the plate ends up being much lighter than the initial weight of the clay. Now we cut off this, and I'll just cut this off. I'm trying not to make it too much bigger than what I need, because all this clay, of course, is, well, it's not wasted, but it's not used for this plate. So now we have the initial dish, and now I'm getting ready. It feels okay. It doesn't feel too thin. It's definitely thinner, but not too thin, I think. I usually put just a little bit of water here on the side of it. Not too much, but now comes, I think, the most tricky part about raising it. But I almost forgot the most important thing, my texture. Because, of course, I need to add the texture before I raise the flange. Because once it's raised, I can't really do this texture. So I always wet it, otherwise it will glue to the clay. And now it needs to go really, really slowly. And I need to have the right distance here. So I think that looks good. Now it's time to raise the flange. And it's very important that you hold on to this tool very tight. It can very easily drift or escape you. And I do it in multiple steps, very slow. Because if you try and move up the flange or bend up the flange too fast, in my experience, it just won't work. And finally, I want to make sure that I have the right angle. So it needs to be completely upright. And now I see one small mistake that I did here. It's I did this on some plates where the texture actually had to be a little closer to the edge. But I think it's okay. This is still a test. So now the plate is done. The only thing left is for me, I want to just make sure that the edge here is nice and clean. And I actually found that spending just a little bit of time on making sure that this is super nice and clean makes the plates a lot nicer. Of course, at this point, I can't touch here at all. Then I will mess up the texture. But you see, the texture is actually a little bit too far away from the edge. I would have liked it to be a little closer to the edge, but it's a detail. Now the last part of it is adding my, well, it's become sort of my signature, my spiral. Doing that, I just use my finger. And again, I don't go too fast. The tricky part here is to know how much to press. If you press too little, you don't get enough. If you press too much, it's too deep. So and then let it go easy, so it kind of floats out instead of being abrupt. Now, I always sort of knock it down a little bit with a sponge, not too much, just a little bit, because I want it to be visible. I want it to have some for the glaze to break over it, but I don't want it to be so high that it becomes difficult to eat off. I think that looks good. Let me just see if I can get it off. That was the first plate. This is only 1,000 grams of clay. And so far, it looks okay. Let me do a couple more. And this clay, of course, I can immediately wedge up for the next clay ball. Just need to make sure that the surface is clean. Now I want to try and make it a little wider, a little closer to the edge. Yeah, I think that was better. I can feel now that I can not make these plates any thinner because I'm almost breaking through the sides of the plates with my flanging tool. So I think this is definitely as light as I can make this sort of design. I don't know if you can see it, but I actually got the texture positioned a little better. It's a question of just a few millimeters, so it's very little difference. And again, just want to make sure that my edge here, the rim looks good, smooth and nice. This is gonna do the. I think there's a few stripes. I don't know if I think I probably need to keep this a little more clean. There's a few marks in there. It doesn't matter because I'm gonna do this spiral, but I would have liked it to be just a little more clean. So, yeah, now you won't see that anyway. So it's another advantage of doing this design. So that's it, another one. And as you see, now I knocked down the side because I hammered it down, so it fell down here. That was really stupid of me. I think though that I can still save it. It's a good example of how you can mess up things. I need to raise it again. So yeah, I think this one failed a little bit. It because I hammered it down, which was very stupid of me. That's how it goes when you're working too fast and you're focusing more on making video than making ceramics. But I think it will still survive. I can see now that I have to be a little more careful with how deep I make the texture, because it almost breaks through. But I think this is still gonna work as a test. So yeah. But you see, this actually failed because I made it too deep, and now the flanges are falling down. So this one is definitely, it's breaking off. So it's a good example. So with these ones, because it is a lot thinner, I need to be a little more careful with how deep I make the textures. That's good to know. You learn. So this one I'll have to take off, just dry it a little bit and wedge it up again. It's gonna be fine, together with the ones I cut off. But it wasn't completely a failure. It was just me not focusing enough on what I should be doing. Now I'll try and make it a little less heavy. So we still have texture, but I didn't press it down as much as I did on the other one. That apparently made it too fragile, so I think this is gonna work better. See, this is much better. One mistake I think I made on the other one is that because the texture was not close enough to the edge, when I pushed up the flange, it became the corner down here was exactly where the texture was ending, and that was a weak point. Now I actually pushed it in just a couple of millimeters more, so it actually, the corner is now at a part of the plate where there's no texture. And of course it's a little bit thicker there, making it a little stronger. So I think this is actually maybe maybe an important element of this when you're trying to make them thinner. And then of course just need to perfect the edge here. In case there's a little bit of I don't know, crumbles or something left, you can of course take it in the trimming. But I like to have this upper part ready to go, because when I turn it around, I'm only going to trim the corners. So the more perfect this is, then I don't need to pay attention to that when I'm trimming. And then the last part is my spiral. Just knocking it down. So I think that came out better. Now what I learned from removing it is I have to remove it very careful, because it is more fragile in the corner. Once it's fired, I think it will be okay, but at this stage where it's still wet, I definitely need to be a little more careful and not hammer it down. So I think it's going to be okay. I'm going to make one last one if I succeed. So I have 3 in 1,000 grams of clay. But because this is an experiment, and remember it's a big jump down from 1,300 grams, so I think I'm actually going to try and make a couple of them in between. So 1150. So then I will have 1,300, which I have lots of plates on, and I actually like them. And then I'm going to make 1,000 and 1150 to figure out what I like the most in the end. And see, this time also, I actually managed to make it a lot closer to the final size. So I'm cutting away a little less, leaving the plate a little bit thinner, a little bit thicker, but it's very, very little. But it may have some sort of impact. Yeah, I think this was good. This is even closer to the edge. Not a lot, but just a little bit. One thing that could improve this tool, I think, is if I made it in metal, it could be thinner, because it is a little bit thick, even though I thinned it out and made it like a sharp edge. I think it would actually work better. You can't make it in plastic, because they have to be very strong, very sturdy. So that's why I made it in hardwood. And it works good, but it is just, I'm afraid sometimes that I'm pushing away too much clay. You can see I'm pushing away a little bit, but it's very little. But I think it would work even better in a metal. I can work in wood, but I don't have the tools and experience to work in metal. So maybe I'll have to ask someone that does. Yeah, I think this also looks good. So now I'm getting the hand of it. Of course, making the flange the same size on all your plates is important for, of course, the inner size of it, but also how well they stack. If you don't make them the same size, they won't stack as well. But I mean, it's not a problem for how they look on the table, I think, but it is for how well they stack. And that is, as I said in the beginning, one of my goals is to have very stackable plates. So now the spiral. Someone mentioned to me, isn't it annoying with this texture in the middle? Isn't it like the food is jumping up and down and it's just uncomfortable to eat off? And no, because even though it looks very dramatic with the glaze, it's actually very little that it jumps up and down. So I was nervous about that, but as it turns out, you don't even notice that it's not completely flat when you eat of it. So it works out really great, I think. So I think this one turned out nice too. So let's try with 1150 and see how much of a difference that is. It looks almost the same. It is. It's only 150 grams more. So it's in between my original 1300 grams and the new 1000 grams. So then we'll be able to compare them in the end. Another thing I found out with this, when you use less clay, they become thinner, of course, that's the whole purpose, but it also makes it a little more fragile with the flange. So keeping it a little more dry, which of course is a challenge because it still needs to be slippery, but try not to soak it too much. And there's two things you can do to avoid that. One is to make them fast. The faster you make them, the less time the water have to soak into the clay. And with this technique, it's quite easy to do it fast. And of course, the other thing is not to drown it in water, which is a bit of a challenge because when using the tube, or the metal cylinder that I'm using now, you do need water because otherwise the friction becomes too big. But again, if you do it quickly and don't have the water sitting there on the clay too long, then it probably won't soak into the clay so much. You could, of course, also, before you make the flange, just dry it a little bit with a heat gun. I haven't tried that. I think it works out okay for me, but in case you experience this problem, that might be an option. Before I make the texture, I always clean it a little bit because I want a clean surface to make the texture on. It's also a good time to make sure that there's no leftover water on your plate, as we just talked about. So keep it very slow. Keep your hands very steady. You don't want it to move around. And you want to try and see if you can get just one full round and then remove it, because otherwise the texture is going to overlap and it won't be a consistent or even texture. So I think this turned out okay. Yeah. So now it's time for the final step, final two steps with the flange. Just adding a little bit of water here, but not too much. I don't want to weaken it. It does feel a little bit stronger. I mean, it is, but 150 grams divided by this, the size of the plate, I'm not even sure I could measure the difference in thickness, but there definitely is a feel to it. So it does feel a little bit stronger, which I guess is good. It makes it a little less fragile. So again, just cleaning the edge. The more experienced you get with this spinal texture, if you like that, the faster you can go. But I always try to go a little bit slow because even when I go slow, it only takes a few seconds. So I don't need to rush that. So I think it looks better, or it feels better. So yeah, I will do a couple more in 1150. And again, even though it's a little stronger, I still think I should be careful. Oh, see, I shouldn't do that, because if I hammer it down, there's a risk that I will collapse the flanges. I think it's okay. Now I finished 6 new plates, 3 of them with only 1,000 grams of clay and another 3 of them with 1150. The original ones was 1,300 and they came out 774, at least one of them, so a little less than 800 grams. So now I'm curious to see how much lighter these ones are gonna be. Next step is tomorrow I'm gonna trim the button, just round it off a little bit. And as you may notice, I didn't tell you, but you saw it, I don't wire off my plates. In fact, I do a lot of things the wrong way. If you ask professional potters or other potters in general, I don't wedge my clay that much. I don't wire it off. I dry them really quickly. I don't cover them up. I don't put any heavy objects on it. I dry them really quickly. Actually, tomorrow they will be dry enough, leather hard enough for me to remove from the bat, because the bats I'm using, they're soaking out a little bit of the moist in the clay, so they release themselves, which also creates a very smooth button that I like. So it's very easy to make it this way. And as I mentioned before, I did almost 100 plates now. Not a single one of them warped, not a single one of them cracked. Not either doing bisque fire or glaze fire. So at least with the combination of clay, throwing techniques, fire, it works for me. That doesn't mean it will work for you. It depends on the clay, depends on the fire, depends on how you throw. But I do think that pushing down the clay this way with the tube, compress it so super much that it helps with both warping and cracking issues. I don't know. I just know that this works for me. So tomorrow I'm going to trim it, but I'm not going to show it in this video because I already showed that a couple of times. So in case you want to see how I finish the plates, how I trim them, how I bisque fire them, how I glaze them, and how they look in the end, I will put a link to one of the other plate videos that I did, because that's pretty much the same. The main difference here is that I made them lighter. I will probably get back to you when I'm finished and evaluating the results, and then we can look at the 3 different versions: the 1300 original, 1300 clay ball, 1150, and 1000, and see what I like the most. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little video, and if you did, please subscribe, share, write a comment. Maybe you have some suggestions for improvement of how I make the plates. That would be great. And please come back again, because next Sunday at 5 p.m. Central European time-ish, I will have a new video. So every Sunday I put out a long form video like this. In between, I sometimes put out these little short videos that are more like a teaser or a quick introduction to what I do. But when you watch a short and you like it, please go and see the full version, because you get a lot more details out of that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to see you soon again. Have a great day.